Hey, this is Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. Today we are continuing Who Ate the First Oyster by Cody Cassidy. This is Chapter 2, Who Discovered Fire. This occurred 1.9 million years ago, which is before humans evolved. Between 1891 and 1892 on the island of Java, Indonesia, a Dutch physician turned paleoanthropologist by the name of Eugène Dubois discovered a thigh bone, molar, and skull cap belonging to an ancient individual with a mysterious near-human shape. Dubois famously declared that Java Man, as he was eventually dubbed, was the missing link between humans and apes. The academic community was considerably less enthused. They rejected his theory out of hand and proceeded to engage in a lively debate over the degree to which Dubois deserved ridicule. The naturalist Richard Lydekker wrote that the skull was likely that of a deformed human, while the German anatomist Wilhelm Krauss declared that Dubois had indeed made a great discovery, but only because he had identified a new species of gibbon. It wasn't until 1921 when the archaeologists Johann Andersen and Walter Granger uncovered the nearly identical bones of 40 other individuals in a cave system outside Beijing that the scientific community recognized Dubois' discovery for what it was, a staggeringly significant confirmation of Charles Darwin's theory of man's evolution. Biologists called this new species Homo erectus, upright man, and for a long time believed it was indeed the missing link, the single species that connected Homo sapiens to the great apes. But 40 years later, in East Africa, Mary and Louis Leakey discovered evidence of another, older primate species. They called it Homo habilis, handyman, for the assortment of chipped rock tools they found nearby. The question then became how the two species were related. At first, it wasn't obvious that they were at all, because the differences between the two species are stark. Java Man hunted, slept on the ground, and had little body hair, a far larger brain case, a far smaller jaw, and a dramatically smaller chest, while Handyman, scavenged, walked the ground in the day but slept in tree nests at night, and was covered in fur. Many biologists would prefer to remove H. habilis from the Homo genus entirely, while H. erectus is so human-like that Lydekker mistook it for one. Yet, over the course of an incredibly short amount of evolutionary time, many scientists have begun to suspect a group of H. habilises did in fact evolve into Homo erectus. What could account for this radical transformation? According to Harvard primatologist Richard Wrangham, the entire suite of morphological changes can be explained by one simple yet profoundly consequential species-altering trick. Someone learned to control fire. For all their differences, Homo habilis and Homo erectus did share one thing in common. They chipped stones to make sharp cutting tools. This ancient practice represents the oldest manufacturing process ever devised. It led directly to knives, arrowheads, and eventually Saturn V rockets, or Saturn V rockets. But it also led to the far more consequential discovery of fire. Charles Darwin called the mastery of fire the single greatest discovery in the history of our species, excepting language. If anything, that's an underestimation. Fire wasn't controlled by our species, it's responsible for it. Fire didn't simply make life easier, it forged us, principally and most dramatically, through cooking. On the basic level, applying heat to food outsources chewing and digestion. It not only softens food, but breaks down its chemical bonds. This sounds like a trivial convenience. It isn't. The smaller and softer the pieces of muscle, fat, sinew, and cellulose in food, and the more their chemical bonds are broken, the more their energy the intestines can absorb. The result is that food, either from plant or animal, provide 25 to 50% more calories when it's cooked as opposed to when it's eaten raw. The control of fire therefore resulted in massive caloric influx, which our bodies have long since adapted. Homo sapiens have evolved to eat cooked food as much as the giraffe has evolved to eat the highest leaves. By now our jaws are too weak, our teeth too minuscule, our stomachs too small, our intestines too short, and our brains too calorically glutinous to go back to a fireless world. There is no evidence of any modern Homo sapiens ever surviving on a diet of wild and unprocessed raw food for more than a few weeks. Our species would be at risk of extinction without cooked food. The mastery of fire was not the result of the enormous behavioral and physical changes between Homo erectus and its more ape-like ancestors. It caused them. No invention, discovery, or insight made before, since, or possibly in the future could surpass the skeleton-shifting influence of the application of heat to food had on our species. And unlike the development of language, the mastery of fire was not an evolution, it was a discovery. Who made it? I'll call her Martine, after the 17th century French geologist Martin Berthold, both because the mastery of fire is primarily a geologic discovery and because Martin Berthold was jailed for witchcraft, which you can imagine was an accusation our Martine, after striking the first fire, would almost certainly have risked as well. Martine was a Homo habilis, born approximately 1.9 million years ago in East Africa, a long, long time before the emergence of anatomically modern humans. She stood approximately 4 feet tall, weighed 70 pounds, and had a brain case roughly 40% the size of a modern Homo sapiens. Her forehead sloped gently to jaws that jutted forward to house a set of larger teeth, and that had a more powerful bite than Homo sapiens. Her skeleton indicates she occupied a curious halfway point in hominin transition from living in trees to walking upright. Her legs and hips were well adapted for walking, while her arms were elongated and her shoulder structure retained adaptations for climbing. Archaeologists believe Martine was largely bipedal, spending her days searching the African savanna for nuts, berries, and scavenged carcasses, but she also slept in trees, likely to avoid nocturnal predators. Martine occupied a middle rung of the food chain, and archaeologists regularly find Homo habilis fossils with claw and tooth marks in their skeletons. She was not yet the endurance hunter that Homo erectus became, as her legs and Achilles tendons are both far too short to give her the efficient stride of Homo erectus. Besides, she was covered in fur and would have quickly overheated on a long run. She did eat meat, but likely scavenged it or killed opportunistically, as chimps do today. Unlike Homo erectus, who set out on long endurance hunts, Martine subsisted as a gatherer and as a scavenger. The proof comes not only from her bone composition, but also from a DNA analysis performed on a modern-day parasite called Taenia tapeworm. This worm, DNA suggests, originated in hyenas, but was passed on to our ancestors some 2 million years ago, about the same time as when Martine lived, when an unfortunate hominin ate an antelope carcass previously dined upon by an infected hyena. Scavenged meat is difficult to butcher without flesh-ripping teeth, beaks, or talons the animal kingdom scavengers typically possess, so Martine compensated by sharpening stones. This doesn't seem like a great intellectual feat, but as the Stanford University professor of archaeology John Rick tells me, Martine would have had to know exactly how the stone would break, where to hit it, how to hit it, and how to hold it. Chipping rocks in the precise way you want is more difficult than one might imagine, and without watching someone else do it first, I doubt many could figure it out. In chipping her cutting stones, Martine demonstrated an even more important skill with regard to her ability to start a fire. A good stone tool maker would also need to be able to differentiate between different types of rocks. She would have selected a hard, brittle rock, such as flint or obsidian, and struck it with a solid river stone to make her cutting tools. Over time, after chipping hundreds of thousands of stone tools, Homo habilis, like Martine, must have sparked the occasional fire, writes Wrangham. That in itself would not be terribly groundbreaking. Fire is a familiar phenomenon to the chimpanzees on the African savanna, and Martine would already have been acquainted with its range of devastating and useful effects. Chimps in Senegal are known to successfully navigate around their habits regularly occurring wildfires. They can predict a wildfire's path and sometimes even seek it out in order to forage the scorched grasslands for cooked food, which is how all mammals, including chimps, prefer their meals. The preference for cooked food is deeply instinctual. A baked potato tastes better than a raw one because natural selection has tuned our taste buds to prefer food that will provide more calories. Cooking a potato doesn't add calories to it, but it increases what our intestines can extract from it, and therefore prefer a baked potato over a raw one. This doesn't just apply to Homo sapiens either. Every animal's digestive system can extract more calories from cooked food, which explains why not only humans but chimps and even rats prefer their potato cooked if given the opportunity. Some scholars believe domesticated dogs evolved from wolves that foraged through early human trash pits for scraps of cooked food. Eventually, their digestive systems, like ours, evolved around this new diet. This universal preference for cooked food suggests early hominins, like chimps, sought out wildfire and perhaps hoarded it opportunistically. But opportunistic fire is not ever-present fire, and the Homo erectus who journeyed from East Africa to Indonesia already possessed an intestinal structure that required cooked food. This suggests they not only hoarded fire, but knew how to light a new one when the previous one was inevitably extinguished. Someone must have learned to control fire. Martine's stroke of genius would have not been the moment she sparked a fire, which would have likely been an unusual but not unique occurrence. Instead, her ingenious would have been her ability to have insight into why rock striking occasionally sparked fires, but usually didn't. The answer comes down to geology. Lighting fires by chipping stones is either straightforward or impossible, depending on which stones you use. The key is pyrite. Pyrite is an iron sulfide, and it presents in different forms. It's sometimes called fool's gold for its visual similarity to the real thing. Fool's gold is a poor fire starter, but when I attempted chipping a particular type of pyrite called marcasite, I was able to spark a fire within a few minutes. Hominins have used pyrite to ignite fires for as long as the archaeological record can indicate. The 5,000-year-old Otzi and the Iceman had a fire-starting kit of pyrite flakes, flint, and fungus tinder inside his pack. In Belgium, archaeologists found a 13,000-year-old grooved pyrite block that was clearly used to spark fires. And in 2018, Leiden University archaeologist Andrew Sorensen discovered pyrite residue on 50,000-year-old Neanderthal hand axes, suggesting Neanderthals lit fires by knocking pyrite against the side of their stone tools. Pyrite is common across the globe, including in East Africa. A modern pyrite, gold and silver mine in northern Ethiopia is only 400 miles from some of the oldest Homo erectus skeletons in Kubifara in Kenya. The use of pyrite, or more modernly steel, to start fires is essential. Other stones simply won't work because they're missing the essential ingredient, unexposed iron. When iron is exposed to oxygen, it combusts. In large quantities, this process occurs slowly and presents as the familiar rust. But in small chips with low volume and high surface area, the iron in pyrite oxidizes so quickly it generates enough heat to ignite tinder. Marcasite is a dark, brittle stone that could have been easy to mistake for a river pounding stone, although once it's split open, the unexposed iron sulfides shine like gold. If Martine happened to sharpen her flint or obsidian stone tool against marcasite, she would have showered the ground with small pieces of unexposed iron. And if she chipped her tool over dry grass, she could have started a fire entirely by accident. This would have been an alarming, if not terribly unique occurrence. The sheer number of chipped stone tools would have made it almost inevitable. But Martine's insight that the dark, brittle rock with shiny flakes was the key is unquestionably the most consequential observation in hominin history. It might seem beyond the intellectual capacity of a hominin with a brain less than half the size of ours to make this geologic insight, but Martine already had differentiated between stones to craft her tools, and it may seem beyond the ability of this distant ancestor of ours to start a fire, maintain it, and then, crucially, realize why it all happened. But in 2005, when the trained male bonobo Kanzi was given only matches and a marshmallow by the primatologist Sue Ravage Rambal, Kanzi could gather kindling, spark a fire, and toast his marshmallow. Martine had a brain twice the size of Kanzi's. Fire changed virtually every aspect of hominin existence. Sleeping on the ground without fire in the presence of Africa's great predators is dangerous even for modern hunter-gatherers. Yet, the skeletal evidence is unequivocal. Homo erectus slept on the ground. Without fire, it would be difficult to explain how. With her fire, Martine left her nest to sleep by it, and as a result, hominins lost the adaptations for climbing trees. Sleeping near a fire also outsourced fur's primary purpose, warmth at night. Freed from the need for thick fur, hominin with their thinner hair, Homo sapiens have the same number of hair follicles per square inch of skin as chimps. Our hair is just thinner. Became more efficient hunters than those with full complement. Homo erectus could cool itself more efficiently than the animals they chased, and if they became cold at night, they simply moved closer to the fire. Sitting around fires also made people nicer. No one knows how effectively Martine could communicate with her fellow Homo habilis, but whatever ability she did have, fire almost certainly strengthened it. Sitting in close proximity to a campfire for its warmth and food forced Martine and her band to cooperate. A violent, uncooperative, or unstable individual would risk banishment from the fire and a virtual death sentence. Gradually, trustworthiness and predictability yielded survival value, and evolution began to favor brains that could better navigate social relationships born around a campfire. In essence, the use of fire favored individuals with larger, nicer brains. Large brains are calorically expensive. Our brains consume 20% of our energy, but here too fire helped. Not only did the fire increase the number of calories Martine could extract from her food, but by obviating the need for her strong jaws, huge stomach, and long intestines, fire eventually resulted in a radical reallocation of the body's resources. In the expensive tissue hypothesis, the paleoanthropologists Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler argue that Homo erectus partly paid for 30% larger brain by ridding itself of the previously robust and now superfluous parts of its digestive system. These radical changes are difficult to explain if not for a full-time transition to cooked meals. Then there is the matter of the time cooking saved, which seems like an oxymoron, but if cooking takes time, chewing raw, inefficient food takes far longer. As we've seen, the amount of time chimps spend eating is more than 6 times that of modern humans, a dramatic difference explained by both the toughness of raw food and the fewer calories extracted by each bite. But because Homo erectus was larger than a modern chimp, Aiello and Wheeler estimate that a Homo erectus on a raw food diet would have had to eat for 8 hours per day to maintain their body weight. By cooking, Homo erectus added hours to their day, and the evidence suggests they used it to pursue the foods they valued. One of many consequences of cooking was a dramatic increase in the time Homo erectus spent hunting. Chimps only eat meat when they stumble upon prey, according to Wrangham, and never embark upon hunts because in the likely event they're unsuccessful, they will starve. The same was likely true for Martine, who was more often the hunted than the hunter. Yet Homo erectus was a hunter. Homo erectus sites routinely exhibit scattered bones from their meals, and they could hunt, according to Wrangham, because when a Homo erectus arrived home in the evening after an unsuccessful hunt, he or she could quickly eat a cooked meal. Of course, Martine would not have realized any of these evolutionary benefits, which took tens of thousands of years to evolve. Martine lived out her life as a Homo habilis, though perhaps a happier, heftier one, considering her heartier meals. Fed and protected by her fire, she may have enjoyed the rare privilege of dying of old age. Upon her death, you would like to think that her community honored this hominin for her discovery. Perhaps, fittingly, she could have been cremated. Unfortunately, Homo habilis didn't honor their dead, so the only ceremony her companions would have likely bestowed upon the body of the greatest hominin who ever lived would have been to haul it away so it didn't attract scavengers to the campfire. That's the end of chapter 2. Please like and subscribe.